From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, if you've been enjoying our podcast, take a moment to rate and review. It may seem like a small thing, but our ratings and reviews make a huge difference in the quality of our show. They help us reach more listeners like you so we can continue bringing you more amazing content. So, if you've found inspiration, learned something new, or just love tuning in every week, please rate the Inspired Intentions Podcast 5 stars and leave us a review and even share with a friend. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into the show.
Hello, Inspired Intentions listeners. Let me give you a little peek behind the curtain of how we plan out our podcast topics. We, of course, are listening for suggestions from you or listening from our guests for things that they want to hear about. And there's a team of 4 of us, Alan, of course, myself, Avery, and Bobby, who are 2 important members of our marketing team as well. And we're looking at trends, things that people are searching for on Google. We have a spreadsheet of a whole bunch of potential topics that we keep and kind of work off that. Well, Alan, who is with me in the booth today, of course. Hi, Alan.
Hey.
Will take any opportunity to talk about gear. So today's topic is, of course, footwear. This came directly from Alan. It's something that he feels really passionate about and loves talking about and just wants to share his information with you listeners. So we're going to do an Alan Gearhead episode.
Sweet. I am a self-proclaimed gearhead. I need a new home, just a house, like a room in a house to house all of the technical equipment that I have.
Not just a closet, but a whole room?
Yeah, for real, a gear shed or something, because it's like I want to have the things that make the stuff that I do as successful as possible. And good gear makes a big difference in that. And that's, I would say, probably where my love of understanding what makes a good shoe and good footwear for any specific scenario came from.
And for anybody who's had the opportunity to go on a hike with Alan, you know, it's a lot of time spent in the woods walking and talking, I imagine. And I'm sure that you probably get a lot of questions from guests, especially if they're in the middle of an activity of, hey, you know what, my feet kind of hurt, or what do you recommend? You probably get a lot of questions about gear.
Yeah, all the time. What are you wearing? What are those? Those shoes look cool. Yeah. I got some good stuff.
I imagine that you do. So let's talk about all of it. And of course, last week we had Dr. Becky, our physical therapist, on, and she talked about plantar fasciitis, and she talked specifically about some footwear options for the prevention of plantar fasciitis. So you almost see this episode as an extension of that. So even more about footwear. Yeah.
And I think one of the big points that Dr. Becky was kind of making is that there is appropriate footwear depending on what you're doing. There is no, to me, there is no catch-all. There is not a single shoe that does everything. And it's a great way to help prevent injury, you know, to have the appropriate shoe for whatever it is that you're doing. Not all footwear is equal.
Is that where you'd like to start?
I think so. I think that that's an important place to start. You know, your body's a chain. Your feet get out of alignment. Your knee can start hurting, which can cause hip pain and lower back, and it'll creep its way up your body. Sometimes it happens in an opposite direction. As a personal experience, where my footwear journey really started was a foot injury in high school. Which I also then had a lower back injury in high school in my younger days, and then kind of carrying that throughout. It wasn't until I was an adult that I found out that I had significantly longer right leg than left leg. As far as not anything that you can visibly see, but enough to cause a difference in your lower back and your hips. So I was having pain. From my lower back, even just like sitting in a vehicle and driving for a long time. And I thought it was from my back injury in high school. And when I went to have it checked out, they're like, you had a back injury? It looks like everything healed just fine on all your scans. but your right leg is X amount millimeters longer than your left.
Oh.
And so like footwear became a pretty important thing to me, and understanding what makes good footwear for any specific situation and what are some things that any situation have in common. And I think that knowing that not all footwear is equal is important, because we want to do things like prevent injuries like what I had. We want to buy quality footwear because it just lasts longer. We want to buy, honestly, I'm telling you to buy different shoes, a lot of different shoes, because if you do a lot of different activities, you should have a bunch of different pairs. A lot of people find that balance is incredibly important to them. The proper footwear can promote balance, especially pronation is a big part of that. And, just that chain, those healthy joints, the connection to the ground is incredibly important. And we want to prevent pain and discomfort for as long as we can.
Absolutely. So this is obviously something that you're passionate about and that you've done a lot of research on and that you have personal experience with.
So I'd like to start not necessarily with like brands and materials. I think it's an important thing that we should get to with this conversation. I want to start with a few principles that kind of span the landscape of all footwear in all situations. These should be things that you think about in every scenario when you're getting a pair of shoes. And there's 4 of them to me.
Okay. So no matter what kind of shoes you're shopping for, these are things to consider.
Yep.
Okay.
Basic for any activity, whether it just be standing, walking, running, hiking, jogging, racket sports, whatever. These things are important. So number 1 to me is it's really important, and it's a little bit about fit, to have a really wide or wide enough toe box in your shoe.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some trends in footwear over the recent few years where you have a toe box that looks super wide. You can have a toe box that's too wide, but a nice wide toe box is basically saying that your foot, when it is in your shoe, right, your toes do not feel scrunched up on the sides. You shouldn't be able to like hit your toes on the edges of your shoe.
I'm doing that right now.
Right. You shouldn't have to cram your feet in it. Right. You should be able to basically spread your toes in your shoe. And I'm doing it right now while I'm talking about this. You want to be able to open and close your toes in your shoe. If you can open your toes all the way out and you can't touch the sides, it might be a little bit too wide.
Too wide.
It promotes some, we'll call it technical term, slippage.
Okay.
Side-to-side movement of your foot in your shoe at the toe box, right? I think something that a lot of people equate is like if they were walking downhill and their toe jammed into the front of their shoe.
Yep.
We'll get to that next, like how to prevent that. But that's like the exact same thing I'm talking about, but most people don't think of it as side to side. That side to side movement in the front of your shoe can be really important. So the opposite of that is too narrow. You cram your feet into the shoe. It can have a lot of repercussions long term. You've ever seen somebody's toe that curls, like pinky toe that curls underneath that next toe, that next digit to it? That can often be from cramming your feet in the wrong type of footwear for so long. Bunions.
Sure.
Yeah. Same kind of idea. That can you see it a lot in sports. People want the tightest fitting shoe possible. People that wear high heels.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Same idea. Or just that cramming of your toes in any shoe. So a nice wide flat toe box that promotes a natural laying of your toes in that shoe. That's not too tight and it's not too wide, right? You can have some that are too wide, and I think that the trend now is that you can get shoes in different widths. Some of my current favorite brand, you can get 3 different widths in most of their shoes, and I think that that's to promote that splayage of the toes. And this is a big thing with balance. If try and curl your foot up in balance, it'd be really hard.
Yeah.
You want your foot to be nice and wide and flat. And that goes back to kind of the primal idea of, when we didn't wear footwear, what our foot would have looked like. It would have been very tough because we were in connection with a lot of hard, sharp things on the ground. but what shape would our foot be? And it'd be a nice wide flat toe, create a lot of balance and a lot of traction, and that's kind of what we're looking for.
You want your toes to be able to grip.
Does that all make sense?
Yes, sure does.
So that brings me to the heel locking idea. When I was talking about your foot sliding forward and backwards, say you're imagine walking down a hill and you feel your foot jamming into the front of your shoe. That means your heel did not lock in place. Look at the width of your heel and then look at the width of your toes from side edge to edge, left to right. Significantly different, right? Imagine putting your foot in water and then placing it on a paper towel. The outline of your foot, what that would look like, significantly more narrow.
Yeah.
Your shoe should also be like that. It should promote locking of the heel so there's no slippage, again, of your foot forward or backwards. And also up and down. Your heel should not feel like it's lifting out of your shoe when you're moving. So not only front and back at that like downward slope, but your foot should not feel like your heel lifts off of the sole of your shoe when it's in the shoe really easily, okay? You shouldn't necessarily just be able to kick your shoe off, like put your toe of one shoe underneath the other one and just press that shoe right off. Have you ever done that to kick your shoes off at the end of the day?
It's literally what I do every single day.
If your foot does that, you may have too much movement in your shoe. Now, the other thing to take into account here is your socks. Your socks can promote that a little bit.
I was just going to ask about,
Yeah, if you have socks that are too slick, that can also promote it. That's not a good thing. But optimally, your heel doesn't rise in and out of your shoe when you're walking. It doesn't let you slide forward all the way to the front if you're going down a hill. Running, especially if you're a runner, your footwear needs to be very specific with that heel locking motion as well, because you can think about jamming. We've talked a lot about running form. You don't want to land on your heel. You want to land midfoot, right? You don't want that foot to slide too far forward when you're running or moving in that pattern.
Where do shoelaces come into this and the tightness?
Yeah, you don't. Shoelaces are a big part of the locking portion and the toe box, honestly, too, to create that left and right movement. You want your laces to really center your foot in your shoe. You don't want them too tight because obviously you want to promote blood circulation in your foot, especially when it's cold. Fastest way for your feet to be cold is for your shoes to be too tight. You can stack as many pairs of socks in there as you want. Your feet will get cold. And often that comes from lacing them up too tight. If you have laces that go closer down towards your toes, a lot of hiking boots have that, you can cram your toes up as well and not promote that splayage. So finding the right amount for the anatomy of your foot is really important. How tight you lace is really important to help that heel locking portion. So your eyelets on your shoes, where those are at, another good thing to think about. And that's just style, basically. Every shoe is going to have some type of lacing system, and that's mostly just style. I've seen some companies go to that BOA system. Have you seen that? It's like a ratchet cable.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be like even distribution of your lacing to keep your foot in place. I've seen that in a lot of technical footwear. My wading boots when I go fishing have that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like an easy on-off thing. So your foot doesn't move, it doesn't slip, but you can just pop. It literally pops, and it releases all the tension of the laces, and you just slide your foot out. But it does a really good job of making sure that my foot's not moving around in that boot.
Got it.
And they make running shoes with it now too. It's super light system. It's a little funky looking on the side of your shoe. There's actually one brand of shoe that has two sets on there. One is the upper to keep your heel in place, and the other is lower down. So it's two ratchets, two BOA systems on one shoe to really make sure that foot doesn't move. And that's actually a trail running brand, which is pretty critical.
Makes sense,
yeah, you're in all kinds of crazy environments there. So number one, we want a nice wide toe box, all the things I named. And number two, we really want our heel to stay in place. Pretty important. And so number three is stack height. So stack height is an interesting one because there's been a big trend in the past 10 years of different stack heights of shoe.
Oh, sure.
And what you're seeing is a giant pillow underneath a lot of shoes. There's even brands that have made their whole identity around a really thick stack height. And we can talk a little bit about that. But basically, stack height is how thick of foam you have between the sole of your shoe, which is the grippy rubber part in whatever shape it is, and your actual foot. Okay. Now we'll get to another idea, which is the drop or offset or rise of a shoe next. That's my number 4. But specifically stack height, imagine a level playing field. You're on a level ground, right? Level piece of concrete, wood in your house, whatever. It's level. And you don't have shoes on. There's nothing in between your foot and the ground. That is 0 stack height.
Yep.
They measure stack height typically in millimeters. And so if you have 20-something millimeters of stack height, that's a lot. That's a lot of foam now in between your foot and the ground. Okay?
Yeah.
So different brands have different amounts. Now, this can be good or bad depending on the brand. Like, what's the right amount? I think it's appropriate depending on the activity that you're doing. But stack height is just the millimeters. For instance, I looked some stuff up here. There's some companies that have like a stack height of, say, like 20 to 30. There's some companies that have a stack height of 7 millimeters. There's some companies that have 30 to 40 millimeters of stack height. So what does that mean? What's right? Again, I think it's really dependent on what activity you're doing, and how long you're going to actually wear the shoes. So we'll dive into a little bit of that next when we get into after we get through the offset. So that it brings me to offset or drop or rise, whatever you'd like to think of it. So a perfectly level playing field, you have, say, 20 millimeters of stack height on your shoe. That means your heel and your toe are both 20 millimeters off the ground. Okay.
Yep.
Let's raise your heel up by 2 millimeters. Now your heel is 2 millimeters. So they added a little bit of extra foam in the back, 2 millimeters higher. So it's at 22 millimeters. But your toe is still at 20. You have a 2 millimeter drop between your heel and your toe, or 2 millimeter offset or rise. The pair of shoes I'm wearing right now, they call it offset. Okay. So basically this is just the difference between the heel and the toe, how far they are away from the ground. Imagine a high heel.
Yeah.
I've never worn a pair, but I imagine that there's a pretty big difference between them, like a wedge.
Yes.
Right? Everybody thinks of that. Your shoes, the trend of footwear over time has been that there's a pretty significant drop in footwear. So this can be good or bad depending on what it is that you're doing activity-wise as well. So these are my kind of 4 concepts of what we need to look for in footwear. We need to take recognition of what the stack height and what the drop is. We need to make sure that it locks our heel in, and we need to make sure that it has a decent toe box to promote that healthy foot and balance that we're looking for.
And maybe you're going to get to this, but if I go to the store and I have all 4 of these things in mind, and I try on different shoes, am I just going for, and to be honest, this is actually how I find shoes for myself. I'll go to the store and try on a bunch, walk around, even though I'm using them primarily for running, and just figure out which one feels best on my foot. I have one brand that I really like. I will try other brands, but I'll find a shoe that feels great, and then I'll buy 2 or 3 pairs until they don't make them anymore, which is always what happens. And then I rinse and repeat. Is that what you're doing?
I do the same thing, yeah. So I would say first off, you would go for whatever your activity is, okay? So when we look at brands and we look at the combination, basically most brands make shoes for certain things. So for instance, let's start with an extreme version, and then we'll talk about the application of the shoe. So a brand called Vivo Barefoot. Have you ever heard of this brand?
Yes.
Okay. Then you know what it looks like. For anybody that doesn't, go look them up. They're really interesting footwear. They promote like a really solid connection to the ground and like a natural foot, right? What it would have been like if you're not wearing shoes. Vivo Barefoot has a 0 drop regimen. All of their shoes have no drop. There's no difference in between the heel and the toe. Okay. Now, they have a stack height of about 7 millimeters. That's pretty small.
Yeah.
That's average. I'm not saying all their shoes are, but they really don't. I couldn't find anything that was over a 10, which means that there's virtually no padding in between your foot and there is no drop at all. This is leaning more towards that like barefoot deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So this type of shoe might not be great for running.
Yeah.
This type of shoe might not be great if you're on concrete all day.
Yeah.
This type of shoe could be great if you're maybe out hiking in a very soft environment, right? This type of shoe.
Without any rocks or roots.
Right, because if you step on a rock, you're going to feel it through 7 millimeters a stack, right? That's basically just the rubber. And whatever insole's in the shoe. That can cause a lot of injuries and a lot of problems for people. This idea of the minimalistic deal. You can't comfortably stand in a modern world on like asphalt and concrete and in shoes like this all the time. It can cause issues. So this is like an example of a very specialty type of footwear. And I know people have run marathons in these things. I know people have done all kinds of stuff in them. I'm just saying for the longevity of your foot, I don't think it's a great idea. But let's go to the opposite version of that. Okay. Hoka. Everybody's heard of Hoka. I see them all the time. The average stack height of a Hoka is 30 to 40 millimeters, which is on the upper end of what I can find.
Yeah.
And this has been a big trend. And the average drop, which I think is pretty good, is a 3 to 8 millimeter drop. They don't have a tremendous drop, but they have a ton of foam in between your foot and the ground, right? Another brand real quick, Ultra. Okay, they have a 0 drop regimen. I think 90% of the shoes they make have no difference between the heel and the toe. But their stack height is somewhere between 20 to 30 millimeters, so a little less than Hoka, and they have a 0 drop regimen. Okay. So what should we look for? Like, there's so many different things out here. When we go to that store and we go to look for something based on our application, what is it that we're looking for? Your general safe bet, Rachel, is a drop somewhere around 8 millimeters to maybe 10. 3, 0, all this stuff. It can be good for some applications, but it can be really hard on our body. That shock on the body when we've been wearing something for however many years we've been wearing it to something really, really minimalistic like a 3 can be harsh. We can see knee pain. We can see Achilles issues, tendinitis, things like that, meniscus problems, hip and alignment issues with our hips. So we need to be conscious of what it is that we're doing, but really trying to find something that's not too great of a drop, that's jamming your toe down in the front of that shoe, like a lot of brands do. So anything over like a 15 millimeter drop. But we perhaps also don't want to jump straight to a 0 or jump straight to something that's flat, especially if we're living in a modern world where we're on concrete, where we're standing, where we're in gyms, things like that. So with that in mind, it's just a combination of what you're doing, and it's a combination of what the footwear brand has. If you have a shoe that has too much stack height in it, you can soften your feet too much, and you can cause a lot of metatarsal injuries. So you can't have a shoe that's too soft. That's why I'm not always a big fan of Hokas, because they can cause that problem. I'm not a big fan of all the 0 drop like Vivo, because you can also have the exact opposite effect. Somewhere neutral in the middle, depending on what it is you're doing, is really, really important. Okay. And I think that brings me closer towards like my general shoe. What I like is something that's like an 8 millimeter offset and something that has like 20 millimeters of stack height, or somewhere between 15 to 20. Less than that, I feel too many rocks under my feet. More than that, I can't feel anything. Right. And then it goes on to quality.
Talk to me about materials.
So materials are important. So imagine you're in, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
A lot of shoes, when you first put them on, they feel really good. You go in that store, like what you described, and you're like, oh, these feel great.
Yes.
And then you wear them for a while, and maybe your perspective changes. I also find that people keep their shoes way too long.
Hmm.
They wear them for way too long. And materials break down, right? So materials can be really important. If you have a cheaper shoe that has a ton of stack height, like a ton of foam, that foam is going to change quickly, significantly. Where you might have a drop that's pretty normal, like for instance, a 8 to 10 millimeter drop between your heel and your toe. If you walk on your heels, if you place your heel first when you walk, which isn't necessarily great for your chain of your body, you're going to wear the foam in that heel out really quickly. So finding materials and brands that use quality foam and quality rubber soles are really, really important. For instance, for somebody, we talked about Achilles problems.
Yeah.
I see it pretty often. I've had it before, and I got it myself when I went to a zero drop shoe. And here's what happened. I brought a zero drop shoe that had a pretty regular stack height. And after about 6 months of hiking in them, I started to have discomfort and pain. What happened is the heel dropped lower than the toe did because the foam wore out. And all of a sudden, I wasn't wearing a zero drop. I was wearing a -3. You can measure it.
Yeah.
You can go in and measure it. You can see that the insole flattened out and the foam went dead.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And so then I had some Achilles pain, interestingly enough. Felt like a shockwave through my Achilles. I'm like, is my Achilles going to tear? What's going on? Right. And so that's something to keep in mind. You shouldn't wear a pair of shoes for a long time. If you start feeling discomfort, it's probably time to change. But like the foam is an incredibly important part of that shoe.
Yeah.
I don't mean to hate on a specific brand, but like my mom wears Skechers and had for a long time. The foam on those are super low quality and they wear out so fast. And she would wear them for way too long and then she'd have pain. So keep that kind of thing in mind. They may feel great when you first go in the store, but finding something with quality materials are important. Same thing for like waterproofness and mesh in your hiking boots or leathers as well.
Is price a reliable indicator of quality for the most part?
Price is usually a reliable indicator, yeah. Usually you're not just paying for the name brands when it comes to a lot of these shoes now that are specialty shoes because they're using really high quality materials. But the only way to really know that is to do a little research on the materials that they use in the website. So when I buy a pair of hiking boots, I really don't buy anything that doesn't have a Vibram sole on it. Vibram sole, Vibram is a company that just makes rubber.
Okay.
That's all that they do. And they lease out their rubber making material list, and a company can pick like, I want something that's sticky on wet rocks and super durable, or I want something that's very, very tough and rigid, or I want something that's super flexible. They have a rubber for that. And you'll see it. It's a little yellow logo on a lot of the shoes, and it makes for a really high quality rubber. So I look for things like that. I look for, if I'm buying a pair of hiking boots, I look for Gore-Tex. I don't buy waterproof this or waterproof that. I buy Gore-Tex waterproof boots because they are going to last forever. I prefer leather over synthetic now, especially around the toe for hiking boots in specific. I prefer mesh shoes for running shoes, especially mesh around the toe and the toe box. I prefer, honestly, even a specific type of eyelet on my hiking boots down to that, because if we're going to pay extra money for quality, we might as well get as much life out of them as we can. And these certain materials and brands are creating things that are going to give us a lot more life out of our shoe. The other material that we kind of mentioned in this is your insole. Your insole in your shoe can be incredibly important. If you're gonna buy a pair of shoes, pull that insole out and just see what it looks like. If it feels cheap and thin, but the rest of the shoe feels really good, that's something that you can fix. I put new insoles in almost every pair of shoes that I own. There's certain insole brands that won't add any offset in your shoe, like it's not too thick in the heel. It's just more quality. My mountaineering boots that I wear, have and do change the offset in my shoe, and they actually have carbon fiber built into the insole to keep my foot in a very specific place when I'm on incredibly rugged terrain. So that's another material, kind of. It's more of a thing, but that's something to keep in mind. You don't want your insole to wear out and have your heel drop below your toe at the same time. And it can really just improve the connection with your the earth to your foot that you're working with. Materials are incredibly important.
And again, price probably being a pretty good indicator of.
I personally feel yes.
Okay.
I feel like price is a pretty good indicator of it. That you're looking at a $40 shoe is probably not going to last you very long.
Yeah.
We should be replacing our shoes every 300 to 500 miles. That usually means like 3 months, 6 months. For me, I'm looking at getting a new pair of hiking boots every 3 months, every 4 months. And it, from a price point wise, it's what I do for a living.
Yep.
So it sucks in a way that you have to buy so many pairs of shoes, but I do get to shoe shop a lot. So there's also that. But it's just foot and knee and hip and health of your body in general.
And we are all benefiting from your shopping experience.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I wanted to give a reminder to listeners. So, I run a lot. My husband and I walk a lot at the end of the day. And so I am also pretty picky about which shoes that I buy. And about a year and a half ago, I was going to a chiropractor because I had some pain in my IT bands, just some general tightness in my hips. And she said, well, tell me about your shoes. And of course, I felt very proud to say, I replace them regularly. I understand mileage. I do spend a fair bit amount on them. And she said, okay, what do you wear around your house? And I have a standing desk. So most of the day I stand. And what I was wearing around my house was $6 cute little slippers that I got off Amazon. And I felt silly because I didn't even think, that's 6 to 8 hours minimum every single day that I was standing on $6. I think they were plastic, Alan. They looked so cute.
They probably had a zero rise.
Of course, yes.
No stack whatsoever. Your heel was flopping around everywhere.
Of course. So I invested in just slides that have a lot more support, and it made a difference for me almost immediately. So yes, we've spent a lot of time talking about hiking and running and walking and exercising, and do not forget just being around your house.
Yeah, makes a huge difference. If you're gonna wear footwear, just make sure it's quality and it's the right thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's always going to be scenarios where you wear like the cutesy stuff on a date night or whatever. But when we're doing the things we generally do, like, you spend a lot of time standing at the desk.
Yep.
You got to make sure you're wearing the right stuff. And I think, you could dive into more technical side of materials, different types of foams. You could dive into specific brands and things. But just take into account the 4 principles I kind of threw out at you. Make sure your heel doesn't move around a ton, so maybe get rid of those slides, Rachel.
Yeah.
Make sure your toes can spread out. You can move those, but they don't move too much. Make sure that you have a nice, mild drop in your shoe, something around an 8, maybe a 10. I don't love going lower than that because the risk of injuries heightens as you get closer to 0, but and then also a nice, decent stack height. You don't want to feel every rock underneath your foot necessarily because that can cause some issues, but you also don't want to lose connection with the ground by having, 30, 40 millimeters there. And if you have 30, 40 millimeters, you're going to have to replace those shoes way more often because that foam wears out.
Yeah.
So all really good things to keep in mind.
Alan, thank you so much. I certainly learned a lot today, and I feel like I was someone who knows a lot about shoes just because of what I have to buy them for. So thank you so much for sharing with our listeners and with me too. Anything else that you want to add?
Just that, like, if this is something that you're considering to be maybe a factor of pain that you have, if this is considering something that you want to look more into depending on the sport that you're in, or activity that you do, or you just stand at a desk all day, look into a bunch of different brands and look to see what they're listing on their website, see if they're talking about what these things that I named, see if they're talking about stack height or offset or any of this stuff. Go find a store that can help measure your foot specifically. People have different size feet, right to left. Go find somewhere that will tell you some brands that meet the shape of your foot really well, to where you're not sliding around and moving. Have somebody that will measure your arch in your foot that may play a role in the right insoles for you to get. And like right here in town, I send people to the local shoe store all the time when they bring up I have heel pain or I have this or that. We have one called FootRx here that does all the things that I'm naming, and they suggest a lot of different types of footwear for folks, and they'll help them narrow it down based off activity from there. So one brand might make a ton of different styles. So find a local spot. You can do the measurements and stuff yourself to get insoles, to get the right shoe, but having a professional do it right there in front of you is pretty cool. And then you have a bunch of options. And honestly, once you find a brand, try and stick with it unless you start having some pain or issues with it.
Thanks so much, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been excellent.
Absolutely. If you guys got any questions, feel free to reach out.
Please do.
We are happy to help.
Help with your feet.
Help with your feet if we can.
And Alan's always happy to talk gear.
Yeah, anytime.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.